What is up everybody, it is me DevilNeverCry, and in this video I'll be discussing DMC2, the black sheep of the DMC franchise, and a game that its creators seldom like to talk about. DMC2 is a mediocre game at best that is made far worse when compared to its predecessor. As always, make sure you subscribe to stay up to date with anything and everything Devil May Cry, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out when new content drops. So is DMC2 all that bad? Considering that the franchise got 3 other entries after it, 4 if you include the reboot, and the fact the game did sell 1.7 million units and is listed on Capcom's Platinum Titles page, a page you can check for yourself where Capcom lists all the games they've made that have broken 1 million in sales, surely the game cannot be all that it is made out to be. Well, as if it wasn't obvious enough, a game selling well does not inherently mean that it is a great game. You have to understand that the original Devil May Cry was a hot release straight off the bat and was successful in all territories of the world, and so many thought the sequel to be up to that standard, but considering the development of DMC2, it wasn't anywhere near. To say that the development of DMC2 was poor is an understatement at best. For starters, Hideki Kamiya, the director of the original Devil May Cry, wasn't even informed of a sequel. He didn't know that it was actually being made until well into the development, when another team and another director had already been chosen. So who is the mystery director that took over the reins for the sequel to the original Devil May Cry? Unfortunately, we will never know. You see, 4 to 5 months before DMC2 was set to be released, it was still an absolute broken mess. Capcom had to bring in Itsuno-san from another internal team to help clean up the original director's mess and salvage as much as possible. Because of this, the original director's name was stricken from the credits, and Itsuno had his name slapped on a title that he barely had a chance to work on. It's actually because of this that we got DMC3. Itsuno-san did not want to leave the series on such a sour note and decided to dive headfirst into DMC3, attempting to make the best action game possible. But that is besides the point altogether. The idea for DMC2 was to make a larger, grander sequel to the original Devil May Cry. They had set out to have much larger locales, they had set out to have a more action-packed camera that was less static than the fixed point of views in the original Devil May Cry, and they kind of just butchered the game and the ethos of the original Devil May Cry completely. The original Devil May Cry was created with a score attack or time attack ethos in mind. Hideki Kamiya was a big fan of arcade games growing up, and this kind of shows in the original Devil May Cry, where the game was made to be played repetitively over and over in an attempt to improve on your previous score. This was something that they had carried over into DMC2 with the whole short mission structure, but botched it completely. The reason that the structure worked so well in the original Devil May Cry is because every aspect of it was fine-tuned. From the environments to the way Dante controlled, to enemy encounters, their movesets, their patterns, just everything about that game was fine-tuned to make it fun to play over and over, and to push the player to improve on their score. DMC2, nothing feels fine-tuned whatsoever. Starting with the most basic of factors of why this game is so terrible, let's talk about the environment or the setting of DMC2. Sure, they're a lot larger than the original Devil May Cry, and yes, the camera is slightly more dynamic in the way that it follows Dante, but the environments are drab, bleak, boring, and yes, whilst they're larger, they are filled with nothing to do. They even decided to cut secret missions and opt for secret combat rooms, which would sometimes provide you with some orb fragments or orb caches, but they're nowhere near as compelling as they were in the original. But I guess environments and locales aren't the be-all end-all when it comes to character action games. That brings us to Dante himself. And when I say Dante, I don't mean the way they butchered him in the story, I mean the gameplay overall for DMC2 and how the characters essentially control. Compared to the original, the characters in DMC2 control like absolute trash. From the way Dante is floaty in his movement, to the lackluster effects and reactions to when you hit enemies, to the fact that Dante's moveset is trash, the fact that he has 3 swords all sharing the same moveset, Yes, Dante might have access to weapon switching when it comes to guns, but nothing will make up for how bad Dante controls. And whilst we have access to Lucia, she's not really that compelling of a character to play as. She's not that much better than Dante, essentially. But again, it does provide variety to DMC2, and I guess that might be something considered as a bonus over the original Devil May Cry, where you could only play as Dante. The added character still does not make up for the lackluster game design. Sticking with the theme of gameplay and moving on to difficulty, which is why this game has become the joke it has truly become, why it is known as the precursor to third-person shoot-em-ups like Uncharted, and that is the fact that this game's difficulty gives you no incentive whatsoever to use melee attacks or melee weapons. You are far better off shooting things to death from an efficiency standpoint through the entire game, especially when it comes to enemies like bosses. Literally, it's that bad. The game's enemies pose no difficulty whatsoever on any of the difficulties that you decide to put the game on, even on Dante Must Die, which is supposedly the hardest difficulty in the game and is an absolute nightmare in the original and other games. It is nothing in this game. It kind of calls into question as to whether or not this game was playtested at all. I don't think it was personally, especially considering the short time limit that Asuna was working with to salvage this title, but the balance is completely out of whack and it shows. Coming hot off the heels of the original Devil May Cry, this balance issue is exacerbated tenfold, considering that the original game had a fine-tuned balance. The enemies were designed to test your limits and force you to use all the tools at your disposal. That doesn't happen in DMC2. All the game pushes you to do is snap the disc in half and chuck it in the bin. Harsh words, I know, especially for those who had DMC2 as their initial entry into the DMC franchise, and to those people, I hope you decided to play some of the other games and not have DMC2 turn you off from the series forever. But it has to be said, DMC2 was and still is a joke. And that is without even talking about the story of this game, which I'm not going to dive into too much, but long story short, the villain is nowhere near as compelling as the original. In fact, he's a caricature of a villain, especially with the voice acting, and he looks surprisingly similar to Heihachi from the Tekken series. Somebody seems to have dared Dante to not crack any jokes whatsoever and try and be as monotonous and one-tone as possible, and Lucia isn't necessarily a compelling protagonist to play as. She seems to be evil at heart, so to speak, or evil in nature, and there seems to be a whole conceited story of, oh no, but you're good, blah blah blah. Long story short, it doesn't hold a candle to the original Devil May Cry, and that's saying something, considering how basic the original Devil May Cry was, especially including the old Dark Soul with Light line that was thrown in there at the end. And whilst we're here, we might as well talk about the enemy design and the enemy encounters. I'm not talking about the physical appearance of enemies and bosses, I'm just talking about how boring they were to play against. The fact that they were not aggressive and that their enemies were overly telegraphed to the point where you didn't have to make much of an effort to dodge just made things boring to play against. I guess they didn't put too much thought into the enemy design, considering that you could just shoot anything to death anyway. So as you can see, DMC2 did an awful lot wrong, and what exactly did it do right? Well, there are a handful of things that DMC2 did right actually, one of them being the precursor to a style system. The circle button acted as a trickster button essentially in this game, where Dante could roll, backflip, cartwheel and run up walls to his heart's content. This was included in DMC3 but expanded upon with the whole style system, which is why the series is well known for its gameplay now. I guess you could even include Dante's hair physics as something it has over the original Devil May Cry, or in this game it swings around violently in reaction to Dante throwing the sword around. Heck, you could even include the cel-shaded nature at times of the original Devil May Cry 2. I'm not sure what it is, but at random times the game tends to look pretty cool, or at least Dante's character model does, but then again at other times it seems pretty bad. And whilst I've just spent the better part of the previous 10 minutes telling you why this game is miserable, if you look at it on paper, it is not the end of the world. You've got a game that runs fine from start to finish and doesn't crash or brick your console, which is a low barrier to set, I know. You've got different unlockables, you've got different upgradable parts of your character's moveset, you've got multiple characters to play as, and you've got different secrets to find. So there is some form of a decent game here. It's just that unfortunately when compared to the original Devil May Cry, it is absolute filth. Especially when it comes to a sequel which is supposed to be iterative of what came before it, albeit it's supposed to be doing things a whole lot better. At worst, sequels tend to be just as good as the original, but when you make a sequel to an amazing game and it ends up being this much worse, it's no wonder that people are going to laugh at it. I would like to mention though that if you are planning on playing this game, do not do it to yourself. It is a lot worse than you remember. This comes from somebody who's platinumed DMC2 twice. I've spent far too much time playing this game and I'll be happy if I never have to see it again. With that said though, I personally wouldn't mind a remake of this game provided they make it a lot more like the original Devil May Cry, or they go balls to the walls and fill it with the modern DMC5-esque combat that we currently have now. But that is going to wrap up the video, folks. If you enjoyed the video, do be sure to leave a like and let me know down in the comments below what you think of DMC2 and why exactly the infested tank is the best enemy ever made. With all of that said and done, people, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I would like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I will see you all next video.